Back in the day, tackling the quarterback didn't sound nearly as intimidating as it should. They called it tackling the QB for a loss. Too many words, and frankly, too boring. Deacon Jones took it upon himself to come up with something better.
I mean, it's just like you put all the offensive players in one bag, and I just take a baseball bat and beat on the bag.
But this isn't just a story about naming a play. To change the game, he needed to be more than just the NFL's Shakespeare. He had to be a force that could not be ignored. And he was.
I wasn't going to be a lawyer. I wasn't going to be a doctor. I wasn't going to be the president of the United States. I was destined, just like Ray Charles was born to sing the blues. Deacon was born to rush quarterbacks.
In 1961, offensive linemen averaged about 250 pounds, but Jones weighed in at 271 pounds and was 6'5", with the speed to match. He once brought down the NFL's fastest man, Bobby Mitchell, but before catching him, he quote, ran with him for 10 yards or so, matching him stride for stride to show he was as fast as Mitchell. With that unmatched blend of speed, size, and power, Jones became an impossible obstacle. If you ran at him, you got stuffed. If you ran away, he'd catch you from behind. If you passed, you got sacked. Some people dismiss the accomplishments of players from decades ago, thinking today's athletes are far superior. But one thing is clear. If Deacon Jones was playing today, he'd still be a star. Yet despite being nicknamed the Secretary of Defense, few defensive stats were actually tracked. Jones would force football historians to change that, go back, and create an unofficial record book. And what they recorded is truly phenomenal. He led the NFL in sacks 5 times. No other player has done it more than twice. These are his career stats. You can see 1964 to 1968 was peak Jones. He unofficially got 26 sacks in 1967. The current record is 22.5. This is in 14 game seasons. I'm struggling to think of a stretch as dominant as this on defense. There have only been 12 20-sack seasons in history, yet from 1964 to 1968, Jones averaged 20.5 sacks a season. I mean, this is domination that is hard to comprehend. I wish I could have watched this guy live. Furthermore, he did this in an era where offenses were passing way less. As an example, for the top 20 quarterbacks with the most attempts in 1967, the average was 292. In 1985, a year Reggie White was dominating, for example, the average attempts was 445. Yet despite having almost half the opportunities, he was twice as efficient. Not only was this man a physical specimen, he also developed one of the most infamous and deadly moves in the game, the head slap. The slap to the neck would stun his opponents, cause them to blink, and that extra moment they took to come back to reality was all Deacon needed to sack the quarterback. And that move was borrowed from his teammate Rosie Greer, but Jones mastered it. Rembrandt, of course, did not invent painting, he'd say. A combination of a right hand from Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali. It was a move that left bruises on his opponents. It was such a good move that everybody started doing it, so by 1977, the NFL had to ban it. On top of this, he also benefited from excellent teammates. Following the addition of Jones, the Rams would draft Merlin Olsen in 1962. Then in 1963, they traded for Rosie Greer, and Lamar Lundy had been there since 1957. These 4 would form the infamous fearsome foursome. Jones and Merlin Olsen would also go down as arguably the greatest at stunting. That's when 2 defensive players cross paths or switch lanes to confuse the offensive blockers, therefore creating openings. David Jones gave himself the name Deacon. He wanted something more memorable, and once quipped, given the violence of the sport, the religious undertone could be beneficial. My name is Deacon Jones, he said. I've come to preach the gospel of winning football to the good people of Los Angeles. But Jones's journey to the pros would be anything but normal. He was found accidentally by Ram scouts and turned out to be one of the greatest players ever. They found him while watching tape of another player. Jones played during the 60s and grew up in the segregated South, so he experienced a great deal of racism. He received a scholarship to play for South Carolina State, a historically black university, but in 1957 Jones attended a protest in response to black students being denied service at a restaurant. For that, he would lose his scholarship. He then spent 1 year inactive. After that, he received an offer from Mississippi Vocational after a coaching assistant was hired from South Carolina State. Deacon would use this suffering as fuel to dominate on the football field. It gave me an outlet for the anger in my heart. He was out to punish you on every down, and man was he good at it. But it wasn't always that way. The 14th round pick came out as a work in progress. That's understandable, given the lack of coaching or support he received growing up. Apparently, his stance resembled that of a frog. I'm trying to picture what that would even look like. Really though, he didn't need much coaching to exert his dominance. Once we got him in a stance where he could get off the ball, there wasn't a whole lot to teach him. The Rams would struggle, not achieving a winning record till 1966, when head coach George Allen arrived. They made the playoffs just twice during Jones' career, losing in the divisional round on both occasions. As we already saw from the stats, poor team performance did not slow Jones down. In 1966, the fearsome foursome would lose Rosie Greer to an Achilles injuries and subsequent retirement. According to Greer, following the assassination of RFK, who he was campaigning for, Greer was overwhelmed and decided to retire. He'd be replaced by Roger Brown, and Jones would, well, no surprise, get a lot more sacks. This was the year he would record, unofficially, 26 sacks. The Rams would go on to win the divisional title and rank as the #1 defense in the league. In 1971, Jones suffered a foot injury and his production would slow down, finishing with just 4.5 sacks that offseason. Jones would still play as much as possible. He missed just 5 games of a total 196. He was there to play on every down. This is what he had to say about the Pro Bowl. I feel it captures his attitude perfectly.
Every time the uniform goes on, then we expect to play. We expect to play and play the same tempo, not just go out there because one thing is different. You're in an all-star game. Okay, we're in a football game.
He'd be traded to the Chargers and see a slight boost in production, making his 8th Pro Bowl. Of course, this wasn't prime Deacon Jones, but he still had something left in the tank. Jones was able to convince head coach George Allen, now coaching the Redskins, to let him kick an extra point in his final regular season game. He converted it, wrapping up an all-time great career.